Hey folks, and welcome back, or just welcome if this is your first time here. My name is Daniel, and today we're going to be focusing in on crafting small bits of scatter terrain to help flesh out your table. We're going to be doing it using small wooden bits that you've probably already got around your craft room, like toothpicks, matchsticks, and coffee stirrers or popsicle sticks. Very simple stuff that you can make some very cool crafts with just a little effort. Alright, let's get started. I'm going to start by constructing some barricades, or deterrents against charging soldiers, cavalry, even monsters. This first craft is going to be done entirely with toothpicks. They're a great crafting material and they are dirt cheap. I bought a couple containers of them for about $1 each many years ago, and those are still the ones I'm using now. To make our first barricade, I'm going to cut one of the pointed ends off of each toothpick. They don't have to be perfectly even, mind, so you can just kind of have at it. If you want to, you could even save the points you're cutting off to use in the making of spike traps using the methods in my last Dungeon Basics video. And yes, that's a shameless self-plug. I ended up using about 20 toothpicks for this. Once they're all trimmed and lined up, I size them against one last toothpick, which I cut both points off of. This gets glued in place with tacky glue as a brace for the others. I add a second one in just the same way, a little lower down. And eventually, I actually mirror those on the other side of the barricade as well, but that's just because I think that looks better. For now though, I take a single matchstick and cut it in half. Now that's what I'm using for the supports on the barricade. You could absolutely still use toothpicks for this, but I wanted something a little more substantial. Thankfully, the tacky glue makes the legs easy to stick in place. If you don't have tacky glue, I'd recommend super glue or even hot glue before PVA for this part. And believe it or not, the construction is now pretty much finished. Barricade 2. Okay, I wanted to try a different design here, and I ended up doing this two different ways. Now for the first method, I just cut some toothpicks in half and got out some silly putty. Yes, the children's toy. It can actually be useful for masking things while painting, and sometimes for miscellaneous crafting things like this. Now here I'm using it to hold the toothpicks while the glue dries and to make sure that all of the braces I'm making are roughly even heights. Now I hate to give spoilers on my own video, but this ended up being kind of a mistake. Even once I glued a crossbar in place, the silly putty didn't want to let go of the toothpicks. It ended up being kind of a mess, and not just because that neon orange blows out the lighting in my video, though this method did technically result in a good finished product. Of course, as soon as I put this together, I immediately saw a much easier way to do it. Some of you might have already spotted it, but just in case you haven't, I'll go over it. It's not always how it goes. Having had my belated eureka moment, I set about making the exact same craft again, in a much easier way. The toothpicks still get cut in half, but this time I just lay 5 of them out evenly and glue another trimmed toothpick across them as a brace. Then I actually just repeat this exact process over again, but put the brace up a little higher, closer to the pointed end of the toothpick this time. And then once the glue is dry, I add some tacky glue to the brace and yeah, they just slide together. Very simple and easy and no need for silly putty. Well, that's how it works sometimes. You learn as you go. It just goes to show there are always multiple ways of achieving the result you want. Next, we're moving out of the world of barricades and heading into signposts instead. Now this is a craft I've made before and always find useful, so today I'm going to share it. I'm starting by cutting down a piece of crappy junk mail card for the base, but gift cards or even cardstock from food packaging is great for this. I'm using some of AK's desert sand as the base texture because that fits with my setting, but really you can use whatever you like here. The last time I made something like this, I just used some dirt from the yard for the base, so there's really no limits. I spread this on, smooth it out with a little water, and just try to make sure to get rid of any fingerprints I may have left behind. Super important in both crafting and covering up your crimes against humanity. Not that you'd do that. I'm sure you're nice. After that, I put a bit of tacky glue on a matchstick and it just goes straight into the basing material while it's still drying. Even if you don't need a signpost, it also does this. So, yeah, be jealous. I'm using a bit of a coffee stirrer for the signboards. You can use a popsicle stick for this just as easily if you cut it down a little, but I like the rougher texture the coffee stirrer has. So I trimmed that down to a size that looks right to me and cut some points into one end of each piece. Now if you wanted to, you could freehand place names onto the signs too, but I like to leave them blank because I don't think it changes much visually, and this way it's more dynamic. Then it's just a matter of some tacky glue and some drying time. For the construction of my last simple toothpick craft, I start by cutting some bases, tiny ones this time. This is just like the last step and it gets used the exact same way. A coat of AK's desert sand and a toothpick with a bit of glue on the end to start making a pole to fly some banners from. The banners themselves can be made easily from either toilet paper, tissue, or paper towel. It just gets cut down to size and folded around the toothpick. Once I'm sure it's the shape that I want it, I take a mix of water and PVA glue and dab it gently onto the paper. I make sure to scrunch the paper up very slightly while it dries too, so that it looks like it's blowing in a breeze. I ended up just making 2 of these in slightly different shapes, but this exact method could be used to line the walls of a castle or to make hanging banners for a nightly tournament. And while that dries, it's time to start my super simple painting process. Normally when using natural wood products, I like to use skeleton horde contrast paint, but this is a lot of wood and contrast paint isn't cheap, so I'm using a homemade wash instead. This is just a bit of dishwashing fluid, some sepia ink, and some water. You can mix these kinds of washes up in any color you like, but I wanted something that would leave it looking relatively pale and sun-bleached. All of the wood pieces on all of the crafts get a coat of this. With the flags dried, it's also time to paint those. I settled on red for one and purple for the other, but there are no rules here. Go nuts. In fact, this would be a good chance to practice your freehand skills even, maybe some heraldry or an icon of the royal family, or even the symbol of your D&D party if they've adopted one. For today though, I'm just sticking with the generic colors. That is definitely 100% a creatively driven choice I've made, and not just me hiding my terrible freehand skills. Yeah. Oh, and now that they're painted, they can get glued onto their bases too. With that, the painting is done, and you could stop right here if you wanted to, but I want to take things just a little bit further and add some finishing touches. For the crafts that have bases, that starts with a bit of burnt grass flock. This will help bring a little texture, contrast, and life to the base. Conveniently, it will also hide the edges where you can still kind of see the cardstock. And don't worry, all that extra flock goes back into the container. I'm not a monster. After that, I picked out a few grass and flower tufts that look appropriately dry for the setting, and use a bit of super glue to help fix them in place. I know when you're starting out, getting a collection of things like grass tufts is an expensive idea and it may not seem worth it. So I just urge you to pick some up when you can. The value these small touches adds to your crafting really can't be overstated. And as the final touch, everything gets hit with a light, deserty pigment powder. I put this over the bases and roughly the bottom third of each craft, as well as anywhere that looks like dust and dirt might collect. In this case, that's mostly along the cross braces on the barricades. With that done, I'm calling these simple crafts finished. And there you go. Some quick, easy crafts that are great for D&D, but also if you're playing skirmish games like Frostgrave or Mordheim, then the little barricades, those are perpetually useful, and the tiny flags even make great objective markers. All of this stuff is incredibly simple to make, incredibly cheap to make, and I really think that when it comes to D&D, it's these tiny crafts, not the giant projects, but the tiny little pieces that you can put all over a table that really bring a setting to life. That's why I focus on these so much, and that's why I'm always sharing my ideas with you guys for more. I'd love to hear your ideas for more if you have some. Leave them in the comments below. Oh, I'm also looking for more of your favorite monsters to paint up in the future. If you have a favorite D&D monster, please let me know, whether that's a classic, iconic monster you'd like to see painted, or something that you never see painted, and that's why you want to see it done. Just drop it below, let me know, I'll make sure we get to it. Alright, thank you for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, there are links below to help you do that, and as always, there's more content on the way. I'll see you on the next one.